We have the Ayatollah of fantasy rock and roller with us today, Adam Rank. How you doing, Rank?
They look great in person, and I just can't wait till next year where we can pack it full of 25,000.
Hey, Bob, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. I didn't know it was Ball Guys Day. It was being ranked. I mean, how can you lose?
This is the Dynasty Vipers ViperCast.
Hello out there. We're on the air with Justin Boone tonight. Justin, how you doing? This is ViperCast episode 71. We got our special guest, Justin Boone from The Score, a little Canadiana, coming to you live tonight. How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. Appreciate you having me on. I mean, I was able to get a bit of a suntan. It's this time of year, right, where the off season, I can actually get outdoors, enjoy myself a little bit, have that actual work-life balance, because we're not far away from, going back into the abyss that is the NFL season for, those 5 or 6 months where family members and friends might not see me that much. So doing great this time of year, one of my favorite times of year.
And it looks like you got a lot of prep that goes into your season. By looking at back in their background there, you got a lot of fantasy pros, accomplishments there, top 10, most accurate competition, I think 6 of the last 7 years, which is absolutely impressive. I can't even be the worst person in my house 6 out of 7 months, let alone anything higher than that. You know what I'm saying? But to be one of the top, to be a top 10 in accuracy amongst the best in the business, that speaks volumes about the work you put in the off season and what you do normally. Like, can you just kind of touch base on that? How are you able to do what you do better than anyone else?
I'm still not quite sure. The first year or so that I was in the contest with Fantasy Pros, I kind of just wanted to test myself against everybody in the industry. And my whole goal was just don't embarrass yourself, right? Don't come in last. Just see how you can do. And that first year, I believe I finished 8th the first season. And I was kind of stunned. I kept waiting for the bottom to fall out. Okay, at some point, I'm going to get lapped by the field here. And it didn't happen. And I'm super competitive. And that might be the real answer to your question, which is no matter what game I'm playing, I want to win and I want to try to find every edge to win. So after that first year when I finished 8th, I really made the decision. I was like, wait a minute, I might be able to win this contest. And unfortunately, I'm a Bills fan. Can't really tell by the hat here, but I'm wearing a Bills hat. And I kind of did the Bills thing where I kept finishing, really close to first, but not actually coming away with the win. And I got to a point where I was like, okay, is this ever really going to happen? Each year I was trying to refine my process and, what can I do to kind of, I'm not a big coffee drinker. One year I was like, you know what, that's it. I'm going to start drinking coffee. Maybe that'll get me going a little more. So I was kind of trying everything. And I was fortunate enough in 2019 to come away with the win. So yeah. A lot of hard work, touched on it off the top of, friends and family being very understanding with how much time that I put into work. My wife is, very, very kind. And when I'm, breaking plans in the fall, she's very understanding. It's really just, it's been that, it's been a little luck too along the way. I mean, everything that happens along a football season, you can put yourself in position to try to get those edges, but there's got to be a little luck along the way as well.
Matt, you're on mute.
At least once a show. I thought I did pretty good last couple of shows not doing that. It usually happens. So behind the scenes, before anyone knows, we were having some little microphone issues. It's my turn to actually do it once we go live. It makes everyone feel a little bit more comfortable when I do it. We talk about, I personally, I like to set the bar low. So every once in a while I trip over it and I get praised for my accomplishments. Well, when you finish top 8 in your first year, that bar is set pretty high.
Well, we've gotten to a point now where, and it really got to this point, after a couple seasons where I was doing well, where it was kind of first or nothing for me. It was like the Ricky Bobby, right? If you're not first, you're last. It was anything. I was finishing top 5 and I was the guy that, everyone else was saying, wow, congratulations, another top 5 finish. That's great. And I was just going like, yeah, it wasn't first. Like, when's that first going to happen? So that's kind of annoying, right? Nobody wants to hear anybody complain about how they did well, but not, not coming away with the gold. So it was a weight off my back for sure, getting it. And I know a friend of mine, I wasn't able to repeat this year, finished 5th this year, but a friend of mine, Pat Fitzmaurice, was kind of in the same boat. He was talking to me this year saying, we're always up at the top and, I can't get that first. And I was really happy to see Pat come away with it this year.
Yeah, Pat's a beauty. He's been on the show this year already once, and just sitting there and just learning, talking through that process of how you guys come, like even as far as training camp. Like we're talking about accuracy in training camp, or before the preseason accuracy. These other things that you guys go pretty in depth, especially when it comes to pinpointing this whole stuff. And staying away from matchups, going with matchups. Are you more of like, do you watch that wide receiver versus cornerback matchups, or are you kind of like how's that going to play out?
It's everything. And it's almost like a year-long process, right? Like you start in January, you kind of look back at the previous season. And I always tell everybody, don't look at year-end stats. Look at average stats per game. That's what's going to direct you. It's going to give you much more information than those year-long stats, because the year-long stats are just going to tell you who stayed healthiest that year, right? When you break it down to the averages, that's going to give you a little something more. So it kind of starts with that, looking at what happened the season before in January and starting to make those really, really early rankings, and then just getting data point after data point as you go and things happen. I mean, free agency and the draft, obviously, but during that time, I'm working on my projections. The schedule comes out, and not just, Warren Sharp does fantastic work with this. It's not just who the teams are playing. It's all those other things, how much rest they're going to have, right? When are those matchups taking place? There's just so much that goes into it. And every year I try to find, what was I missing? What are other people talking about that maybe I'm not incorporating enough? At one point a couple of years ago, I think I was taking into account historical numbers too much. Like I was kind of going back a few years when really things changed so much after a year or two that you got to kind of bring that a little tighter. So every year just trying to refine that process. And when it comes down to matchups, following the news, staying on top of those things is probably my biggest advantage. The fact that I put all that time into it, that it's not just about the offensive skill position players. It's about not just the corner and receiver matchups. It's who on the defensive lines hurt, which linebackers out, what's happening in their lives. Is somebody, putting something on social media that you just found out about, two teammates are fighting. It's everything, right? And as we see the NFL kind of become this 365 entity where, we're hearing it's not just Julio Jones being traded. It's, Julio Jones and Shannon Sharp talking live on air. And it's all the drama and everything. And how does that impact, the players on the field? There's just so much that goes into it, and trying to wrap your head around all of it is tough. But, that's the name of the game. And that's kind of where I try to find my edges.
How did lack of a preseason affect how you handled the early parts of the season last year?
It gave me a lot more time in August. Normally in August during the preseason nights every year, and I'll be back to it this year, I'm sure. I watch all the preseason games, and when there's more than, one or two games in a night where, people can kind of keep up with one or two games themselves, those nights where there's 6, 7, maybe more games, I do a big takeaways article. And just trying to watch all those games in one night is, watching a game, trying to speed through it. You go back, okay, let's start the next one, skip in between each play, and just trying to pull out any nugget you can. I love doing that. I think that gives me an advantage, and I didn't get to do it last year. And I think because I got a lot of things wrong. I started the season strong in week 1, but early in the season, and I think a lot of us got this wrong. Some of the rookies, I was looking at it thinking that the rookies were going to be at a huge disadvantage last season, not having those games to get ready in the exhibition games. And then we saw so many rookies come out and just light it up. So I'm curious to see how teams take that moving forward. Maybe some of those mental reps in those Zoom calls and stuff, maybe that was really beneficial versus having them on the field and yelling at them and putting them through drills when, these guys, the top players in their field, right? These guys are fantastic. They know how to play the game. If you can make them understand your system that much better, maybe it gives them an advantage when they start the season. So yeah, I think it hurt me for sure early in the season as far as my accuracy with some of those rankings goes, not just with the rookies, but with a lot of players, we got lucky on guys. I had James Robinson on a bunch of teams. You get lucky on stuff like that. But, I think in a regular year, in a traditional year, there's more of those gems that you can pluck, those Phillip Lindsays. I mean, I know the year that Phillip Lindsay broke out, I was hearing about him. I think it was Cecil Lammey who covers the Broncos.
Mm-hmm.
He was mentioning him around this time of year. I think it was like, rookie camp. And he was saying, this guy's starring in rookie camp. Keep an eye on him. And you can't just jump and make moves based on that, but you kind of, make that note, and then you're ready. Next time you hear someone mention him, one of the other beat writers, boom, you got to be on it really quick. So, it was much more difficult last year, and I'm looking forward to all that stuff being back this season and maybe a little more normal.
Yeah, I'm working on an article right now, kind of a training camp battles article to watch. And I know I love following the beat writers. I was big on James Robinson coming out of Illinois State. I do a lot of rookie scouting. He's kind of one of my guys. But when you start to listen to Leonard Fournette as being a potential cap cut, and then you look at Devon Exigbo, and then Raquel Armstead was kind of in there, and you're thinking, you know what, if Fournette does get cut, there is some huge volume potential here for whoever takes over. And you're listening to the coaches, and we know what coaches say. You take about 50% of that with a grain of salt and kind of go from there. But the beat writers seem to have a pretty good understanding. Cecil, when it comes to the Broncos, he's got his finger on that pulse of that team. Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. So anytime he's preaching something over there, you're going to be listening. I know for myself, when I started the Dynasty Vipers, I started doing weekly projections. I was thinking about getting into the Fantasy Pros competition, this and that. But you know what? Kudos to everyone who does this, but to rank that many players that often, it is tedious. It would get to about week 6 or 7 where I'm like, oh, here we go again. Okay, let's just, yeah. But the good thing is, I know when I get my rankings out, and I feel confident about my rankings. I don't know where they'd actually come with the accuracy, but I'd always compare mine to how you would have yours set up. Just because of the respect I had and the success you were having with the accuracy rankings. I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm pretty close to all this, but why does he have this guy so much higher than I do? Maybe I need to go look back at what's been happening the last couple of weeks. And is this a Cleveland Brown type thing where all of a sudden Lake Erie is blowing something in nasty that I'm not aware of? Are we taking into which, you know what I mean? And that does happen. We had that a couple times last year. I think Tera mentioned that earlier this season, those games in Cleveland on another show, where forget the passing game. The passing game was completely out.
Yeah.
And we don't always necessarily know that until right before kickoff. And when you do your predictions on the Monday or the Tuesday after the Monday night game, to try and predict all the way for accuracy for the next Sunday, especially come weather season, it's you just gotta shake your head.
When people on Twitter are asking me, Tuesday, and I get it with, waiver wire ads and stuff like that, people want that information that early, and I'll give you my educated guess at that point. But I always tell people, check my final rankings, check those rankings Sunday morning, or if it's a Thursday player, I do an update right before those games when we get inactives. Because, at that point, it's kind of like I said about the year-long thing. It's the same every week, right? I'm starting with initial projections, initial rankings, and then I'm just refining it as we go. And when it's the weather stuff, that's always tricky because sometimes people are overrating it. Sometimes people don't even know about it. And it kind of pops up that morning. And sometimes, it's injuries in practice, and it's not always a guy breaks his leg in practice and it's obvious. Sometimes there's, a guy hobbled off and we're not totally sure what's wrong with him, and you kind of got to watch it all week long. But I always say too, I don't think people should just be following one person in this industry. And I say that as somebody who's in the industry, and I consider myself, one of the most accurate people for sure, but I should just be one data point along the way for everyone. There are so many people in the industry that provide great knowledge. When you want to talk about injuries, there's so many great injury analysts now, Gene Bramall, probably my go-to, I would say. And it's the same thing with a guy like Gene, right? He's going to give you his thoughts early in the week, but as we get more information, he's going to try to get that right down to, hopefully as close to what the actual diagnosis is without being able to look at that player. So it's a week-long thing. And you got to wait until the last minute to make those decisions. And, that means waking up Sunday morning pretty early sometimes. I always go back to, the year that Alfred Morris, his rookie season, when he came out, everybody was trying to figure out what was going on with Washington's backfield. And I woke up early that morning. I wake up very, very early Sunday mornings, and I was up at, 4 or 5 in the morning. And there was a beat writer around 5 or 6 a.m. And it wasn't like one of the big obvious beat writers. but I was on Twitter just searching all the running backs' names to see if anybody was saying anything as I was trying to figure it out for my rankings. And I wish I could give the person credit at this point, but it wasn't one of the bigger names. It was a smaller beat writer who just mentioned that Morris, I don't know if it was he'd been told or a source was telling them that Morris was going to be the guy. So not only did I bump him up my rankings, I went out and picked him up in every single league. And at that point, I think going into that first Sunday, I think he was considered to be like the third on the depth chart. I don't think anyone was looking at him as the starter. So I ended up with him in every single league. And there you go. It's just another thing where if you're putting in the time and you're really searching and you're trying to do that research to, figure out every edge, sometimes you get lucky with that stuff.
So I just want to touch on one more football topic before we get into the meat and potatoes of the show here. Justin, you're Canadian. I'm Canadian. We've both been in Canada here for a while here, following the football game a little bit. It's kind of a different thing now because there is a bit of a Canadian invasion into the National Football League. We've seen guys come through it, offensive linemen. Franklin came in. We've had our Vanderjacks. We've had guys kind of come in and out. We've had guys from the CFL, Warren Moon, Joe Theismann, make their way eventually to Cameron Wake, make their way back to the NFL. But recently, we've seen a lot of young players make that move from Canada high school to the States for big-time programs in college to the National Football League. Just off the top of my head, the last couple of years, we've had some big tape. Say what you want about Canal Harry, but he's there. Chase Claypool out of BC, he's made the jump, and lots of people are high on him. This year alone, we've got guys like Palmer, Chuba Hubbard, St. Jude's, Holland. What's that say about maybe Canadian football in a whole, and why are we starting to see more athletes coming from Canada potentially down to the States and having some degree of success in the National Football League, where we didn't see this 15, 20 years ago? Like we're talking about the biggest name in Canada at the time was probably Nate Burleson. Was probably the biggest name out of Calgary. Went from Calgary. His dad played for the Calgary Stampeders. He got that scholarship to play for Nevada. And obviously he may have been the biggest Canadian born or Canadian at the time that make the jump to the NFL.
I don't know if I have a good answer for you. I mean, talent evaluators are just going to try to, overturn every rock they can and look anywhere around the globe to try to find players, right? We see that even with the guys coming from the Australian Rules Football League, right? So my guess is some of it is that, just trying to find a new talent source. So they're looking a little more to Canada. I don't really consider myself an expert on, Canadian talent coming out. And we joked a bit before the show. I worked for the Hamilton Tiger Cats coming out of school. That was my first gig in the industry. Fantastic job. But going into that job, I didn't really follow the CFL. And I hate to admit this, but after that, I didn't really follow the CFL. As soon as I left there, I kind of went on and started to get more into NFL and stuff. So I haven't been following it as much as I should, but it is great to see these young talents coming out of Canada. I know, you mentioned N'Keal Harry. It was nice to see a guy go in the first round there, and unfortunate that, he hasn't been able to really come through. Because maybe that we see in the NFL, a lot of it copycat leagues too, right? So if he had really shown, maybe that would have helped. Maybe we would have seen some more guys sneaking into the first round who are Canadian. But a lot of great talents. Holland going to a fantastic Dolphins defense, really versatile safety. He's a great player. Can't wait to see what happens with him. Claypool, I mean, what a fantastic rookie season. Really excited for him for fantasy. And Josh Palmer, I mean, I know the Chargers have been thrown out there as a potential Julio landing spot. Yep. So maybe that would push Palmer down the depth chart a little bit if that happens. But if not, Mike Williams probably leaving after this season. So Palmer's going to have a great opportunity there. So I love to see it. I mean, I also like to see, there was some talk and some reports that The Rock, that Dwayne Johnson and the XFL were talking to the CFL. Now, most of my followers are in the U.S., but I don't want to upset my Canadian followers by saying this, but there was some talk that if something happened there, that might lead to the rule changes coming that have kind of long been speculated for the Canadian Football League, and maybe moving to that 4-down football, which I would like to see that happen. I always thought the CFL kind of being the, NFL Europe, being that feeder league, Because I could tell you, having worked in the CFL, the guys who were in the CFL treat it as a feeder league. Everybody thinks they're going to the NFL. So I would like to, based on your reaction, I know you're going to tell me you don't feel the same, but I would like to see that happen if we could, and it would boost the CFL profile if that happened. That really would be the big gain there, because I know the tradition, losing that tradition would be kind of unfortunate, but for the long-term success of the league and just to try to connect it a little more to the NFL, I think it'd be a good thing.
And see, I would love to watch an NFL game played on a CFL field with the CFL rules. The speed that the NFL players, and we'll say what we want. I've watched CFL for a long time. You could tell the difference between the CFL and the NFL as far as the talent pool goes. Yes, they're talented in the CFL, but you get these guys with that wider field, that longer field. Maybe get rid of the rouge. I can justify getting rid of the rouge. A single point for missing a kick, we can do without that. But I love how the game's set up. I love the fact when you're watching the CFL, it's never over. You know what I mean? You can't just kneel the clock out. The clock's running all the time. It's like a 25 seconds, and everything's going. It's quick. It's fast. I like certain things of the CFL, but like you said, I grew up a CFL guy before an NFL fan, and then obviously when I started immersing myself in the NFL, I kind of pulled myself away from the CFL altogether. I still follow it here and there. I'm a big Saskatchewan Rough Riders guy. It was my team, my go-to in the CFL, but now it's pretty much like you said, it's focusing mostly on the National Football League. But I always got this little soft spot. NBA players from Canada going the first couple rounds of the NBA draft. We've had some success with some Canadian players going there. But now we're starting to see that success from the NFL players. And I think I always get that little bit of a warm, fuzzy feel when it's like, yeah, that's a Canadian down there. So kudos to that. But without that, Tera, we know what time it is. It's time to move on to the rest of the show here. And we're going to kick this off with a little softball type question. So, Justin, you are a big-time WWE superstar, or you're coming in to close the game for the Toronto Blue Jays. You're coming in the ninth inning. What is your walkout song going to be?
This one's probably easy, and any friends that I have that are watching, they would know. "Sympathy for the Devil." It's my favorite song. I had a lot of friends who were musicians, and I got dragged up on stage more than a few times to sing it with them at growing up in Niagara Falls, tourist town, a lot of patios, a lot of friends gigging around there. Got dragged up to sing that more than a few times. Definitely my favorite song, and Rolling Stones, one of my favorite bands for sure.
So we almost have to ask this, Tera, don't we? Kind of have to ask this almost weekly. Do you want to spit a few lyrics out for us?
Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm a man of wealth and taste. That's all you're getting. That's it.
You know what? That's more than we've got from anyone else. You're the first one to give us that. So
this is great. Quick answer. Sing for us. I mean, we won. This is great.
You're lucky I'm not still going. Do the whole song.
So diving into you in sports. So you told us you were a big Bills fan. So tell us about what sports you played when you were a kid, and then give us your favorite Bill of all time.
Wow, my favorite Bill of all time. I haven't thought about that in a long time. It'd probably be Thurman Thomas. I mean, when I was growing up, the reason I'm a Bills fan is because I was at a very impressionable age when they were making those Super Bowls. And Thurman was just outstanding, right? Like when you have a player who probably deserved to win MVP in one of those losses, right? Like that's how well he played. The guy's great. Sports-wise, they started us very young in hockey in Canada. I think it was 4, maybe 5. Played soccer as well. And I really didn't discover football as a game that I, could play. I didn't even really consider it as a game that I was going to play. I got to high school, and a friend dragged me to the tryout and was, "You got to come on, I'm going. You got to come with me." And I was like, "I don't really think so." And it's crazy to think, those small moments that change your path in life. I went to the tryout. My friend ended up breaking his arm in the tryouts and didn't make the team. And I just fell in love with the sport. I tried really hard in hockey and soccer when I was younger, and I played with some travel teams and some real competitive teams. But it wasn't until I found football that I kind of realized there was like another level you could go to in competition. You could, push yourself so hard that you feel like you're going to throw up, that you feel like you got nothing left in the tank. And I just love that about football. I love the chess match that it was on the field. So yeah, and from that point on, and this maybe, you know, if you want to say, you know, defend the CFL and what I said about it earlier a little bit, I've kind of dropped every other sport along the way for the NFL. You know, I was big into hockey. Gone. I really don't follow hockey much now at all. I used to consider myself a Dallas Stars fan, a Minnesota North Stars fan, if I want to date myself a little bit. And now I don't, you know, I have friends come up and be like, oh, did you see the game? And I didn't really watch, you know, I can't really consider myself a true fan anymore. You know, baseball with the Blue Jays, I like going to a game, but going to a Blue Jays game for me is basically like going and having drinks on a patio, right? Like there's a game happening there, but I'm kind of there for the social aspect. Basketball is the only one that like I still kind of keep up with. I do quite enjoy the NBA, but football just consumed my life after that, whether it was, you know, playing Madden growing up, you know, or whether it was just knowing that career-wise I wanted to be a part of football, and I was so fortunate that career-wise that I was able to find a job in the industry, and one that I'm very, very happy doing.
I would take a guess that we're probably pretty close in age, even though I probably look 10 years older. I have a very mature-looking face, but you know, growing up in Canada, it was a lot of pond hockey. It was Saturday night. You turn on the hockey night in Canada would come on. We didn't really have much of an NFL influence in Canada at the time of growing up. So it wasn't really that. You had the CFL a little bit. And much like you, I did my hockey, I did my basketball and stuff growing up. I didn't play football until I think the 11th grade of high school. Like it was late for me when I started football as well because of everything else. Which kind of brings me to the next point. I was going to touch on the CFL a little bit, but I think there's something more pressing here. I want to touch bases. Like in Canada, there's not very many options for fantasy football. It's down in the States. You got your ESPNs, you got the NFL Network, you've got your Yahoo, you've got all these major corporations. The Score touches in. Obviously, you're a big part of the Score and how that goes. TSN does a little bit. I know my boy there, Matt, with Sportsnet, he gets into it a little bit too. But the market here in Canada is far from tapped. What do we have to do as Canadians to kind of bring that fantasy football culture into our everyday? Because I know I go, hey, guess who I had? I go to work. I go, hey, I had Matthew Berry on my show, and everyone looks at me like, who? You know what I mean? It's like it's not fantasy football in Canada is not that big deal. But if I go, hey, Don Cherry, I bumped into him at the airport. Everyone's like, oh, you met Don Cherry. It's crazy, right? Yeah. But fantasy football does not have what you would think that big following in Canada at this point. I think it's a very untapped market right now.
Yeah, it depends. I mean, being in Southern Ontario, growing up in Niagara Falls, like a border town, you know, it was very much like the U.S., I felt, right? Like we were very close to Buffalo. And so I had a ton of friends that were into fantasy football. And I mean, working in the industry, I'm around so many people who are into fantasy football. So I can't remember who it was. I had a guest on at one point after the show. We were talking and they were saying like, who do you talk to football about up there in Canada? And I started laughing and I was like, there are a lot of football fans up here. You know, I think the sport's growing. It's always going to be tough to compete with hockey. But I almost want to say that I disagree with you. I feel like football is really big. Like what part of Canada are you in?
I'm out west here. I'm a prairie town guy. So
out west,
we don't have the market. Yeah.
That explains your defense of the CFL too. Cause I've found that everybody in the
no one pays attention to Toronto and Montreal and Ottawa. No one cares about those CFL teams.
Out west in Canada, you know, maybe people aren't as big into the NFL, but I feel like, you know, Ontario, and I can't speak for Quebec and stuff, but especially Southern Ontario, I feel like it's really grown in my lifetime to the point where, you know, I had friends that back in the day, I remember one friend drafted, we were doing an NFL fantasy league, and he drafted Ricky Williams very early that year. And it was the year that Ricky Williams was playing for the Toronto Argos. He was not in the NFL that season, to give you an idea of how much he was paying attention, right? So I agree with you in that respect that, you know, at a certain point, it wasn't as big, but it's definitely growing. It's also funny. I mean, we're talking so much about Canada. When I first got into the industry, I almost didn't want to bring up the fact that I was from Canada. I was like a little worried that no one in the US is going to want to take fantasy advice from a Canadian guy, right? Come on. And, you know, as I had success in the Fantasy Pros contest and stuff, it kind of just didn't matter, I guess, where I was from, as long as my advice was pretty good. It didn't matter what part of the world I was coming from, but as long as I was helping people win their fantasy titles. So, to go back to your original question, I think it's growing. I hope that it's growing out west as well. And I don't know if we'll see it happen, but I've always wanted there to be an NFL team in Canada. I thought we were going to get close when the Bills were playing some games in Toronto. I even made a bet with a friend at one point that the Bills were going to be up here playing. I think I said within 10 years, and I don't think I ever paid that bet off. So I think the time to run out on that one. I think I realized I owe him some money. But hopefully at some point we'll see the NFL grow into Canada. But now it's just the whole episode here is we're just pitting NFL versus CFL, because if the NFL Canada, it's going to be bad news, I think, for whatever CFL team is in that city. It'd probably be Toronto and the Argos.
Yeah, more than likely. So you mentioned the Bills, big Bills fan. I want to make sure we kind of get to restore the roar here kind of throughout there. Julio to the Pats. How does that make you feel as a Bills fan? Is that something you want? You don't want as a fantasy fan and as a Bills fan?
As a fantasy fan, I really don't want to see that. Doing the projections for the Patriots, it's kind of a nightmare. Just looking at the overall pass volume in that offense, whether it's Cam and they're going to run the ball a ton, or whether it's Mac Jones, and I still think they're going to try to lean on the running game quite a bit with a rookie who, at least based on my breakdown for him, I don't know if he's as ready kind of to come in and put up pretty prolific numbers in the pass game. So I don't really want to see Julio end up there for fantasy. As a Bills fan, I definitely don't want to see the Patriots become strong again. That's the last thing we want to see after it feels like we just slayed the dragon. But I don't know if that's where Julio's going to end up. I think there's a lot of better options. And if he's talking about wanting to win, which apparently is one of the big things for him, I don't know that the Patriots are the best spot for him to go to if he's looking to win right now.
Yeah, there were some projections that came out, some betting projections that came out, and I was really shocked. There were teams like Arizona that were like at the very end, and I was just kind of odd, just based off his desire to actually go and win, saying he actually wanted to go play with Cam. I don't know. It's kind of interesting, a little confusing storyline there.
The other funny thing too is you see so many people rush to throw out, oh, this team's going to get him, that team's going to get him, without looking at like the salary cap. And like, there's so many teams right now that just can't, right? There's so many teams that have no chance unless they pull some sort of New Orleans Saints tactics with the salary cap and restructure a ton of stuff, which is always possible, but there's only a handful of teams that can get them. And I know I brought up the Chargers earlier. I think they'd be in a pretty good position, especially with a very young, talented quarterback in Herbert. Would be super, super exciting to see him go there.
Oh yeah, that would be awesome. Going back into you personally. So there's been a recent question going around Twitter, and we wanted to kind of throw that at you and ask you, what's a decision that changed the trajectory of your life? And it has to be something other than marriage or birth of a child.
I kind of touched on it, like just finding football the way that I did was definitely, one of the first ones. And it carried me for a long way, but there's been so many. Career-wise, when I talk about working hard is great, but there is some luck to it in there for sure. Just getting that first job with the Tiger Cats. I was in school. I was looking for my internship, and I was one of the finalists for the internship with Maple Leaf Sports, which was, the Leafs and the Raptors. And I was very confident that I was going to come away with that internship, and found out very late in the process that I did not get it. I came in second, and I was running out of time to find an internship at that point. And one of my professors mentioned that the director of communications for the Tiger Cats was at our school that day. And why don't you go down and introduce yourself? Maybe there could be something there. And I went down, introduced myself. We kind of hit it off, and they had never had an intern in their communications department. They'd never had a staff writer. And he asked me point blank in that meeting, what do you know about the CFL? And I said, really nothing. But at that time, there was only 8 teams. I said, I could learn it in a day, I'm pretty sure. And he thought it was hilarious, and he laughed. And they ended up bringing me on as an intern. And after that internship ended, they offered me a job as a staff writer. And at the time, I don't think there was a staff writer in the CFL. So I was the first there. And, from that point on, I spent 2 years with the team learning about how a professional team works. And yeah, it's a little different, NFL to CFL, but I learned so much about the inner dynamics of a team, not just, the players, how they, treat the job, how they, come, and some are very professional and some not as professional. The coaches, the training staffs, just all of that stuff. It was a great learning experience for me. And then you want to look at, my next move when after those couple of years were up and I was looking for, what's next for me down the road. I applied at TSN, which for our American friends is basically like Canadian ESPN. And at TSN, I went up against hundreds of people to get the job. And the only reason I was told, or not the only reason, but one of the main reasons why they chose my resume and ended up hiring me was because of the CFL background. I had CFL on my resume, and TSN owned the rights to CFL at that point. So you look back and trace it back and go, yeah, I could have ended up with Maple Leaf Sports and the Raptors, and maybe I'm working, in the NHL or the NBA or something like that at this point. Like that could have changed completely my direction. So that was a big one. And I owe a lot to that director of communications, not just for him taking a chance on me. His name's Ram Halverson, a great guy, not just for taking a chance on me, but also when I went for that job with TSN, he was a great reference. They were questioning. I remember one of the things because he called me after and told me they were a little worried after the interview that I was too much of a maverick, is what they said, apparently, that I was going to come in and want to change all this stuff. And, and he was telling him, yeah, he can be like that, but also he's the kind of guy who will, carry pop cases up to the press box, and he'll do whatever you need, and he'll put in the hard work. And not only did he give me that first job with the Ticats, he really helped me get that second job and continue my career with TSN.
Awesome. So kind of diving into fantasy, let's go all the way back to your first fantasy football league that you played in. Tell us about it.
Wow. Yeah, it was rough. I was not very good, with friends back then. And at that point I had some friends that were much better than me. And like everything, it might be a tying thread through all this stuff. My competitive nature got going because I kind of just joined for fun, right? I've heard about fantasy football. Sure. Let's give it a try. And that first season, I did not do very well. It was not very good. I was getting beat in trades. And that's why I tell everybody, this is something that you can continuously get better at. And as an analyst, I always want to try to help educate people, whether it's through my content or right now we're doing like the charity eliminator leagues that John Bosch puts together. And in those leagues, yeah, I'm competing against everyone. But at the same time, I also want to try to help everybody be a better fantasy player in that, right? So I'm reminding everybody before we start, you got to check the scoring settings, right, mate? Because they're a little different in those leagues. We were a few rounds in, and I think earlier today I sent out a message saying, in the first eliminator that I was doing, everybody, it's about 24 quarterbacks off the board at this point. Right now, I think we'd only taken about 15 or 16, like just a nudge, a reminder, like this is a super flex league, right? Like you guys might want to jump on that. And then it leads to so much great conversation and questions. And not only do I, help them, but they're also helping me, right? Like they're giving a ton of advice as well my way, what they see in my content, things they want to see me do. So it's, it's great. And that first, don't remind me. I'm going to have flashbacks of those first seasons where I was not very strong. I wasn't coming away with any titles, but my competitive nature helped me get better over the years.
Awesome.
I love how you mentioned those eliminators and the group chats more than anything. I think when we do the SFB 11 this year, I've been in since the number 7, and it was just getting your group. So you get I got the 111. So you get this whole group chat with everyone with the 111 talking strategy. And then you get the group chat of whatever division you're in. And just, you kind of build that rapport with everyone in those groups. And then after it all dissipates there and Scott Fishbowl and the dust kind of settles for the time being, you've built those relationships, those long-lasting ones potentially that are going to carry you on from this season to next. So I love that. I love how Scott Fish puts that together. And John Bosch, he does everything that he does with those eliminators. I think they're just over $31,000 raised right now for Fantasy Cares. Just from Bosch. Right before the show started, we had Bob Gilchrist in here. He's helping out with those eliminators as well. And he's helping with the Podathon there. He was just going on to a meeting there with Sal. So, it's that time of the season, the SFB Podathon, the Scott Fish Bowl, these eliminators, it's all coming and it's all for charity. So you talk about, wanting the best for everyone you're competing against. This is that time of year. This brings out the best most times in Twitter and the fantasy football community. Speaking of that community, you've gone from the Vanier Cup to the Tiger Cats to TSN to the Score. At one point, you know, where did it kick in? Goes, you know what, Justin, I want to be in the fantasy football industry. When was that decision made? Because I'm sure as soon as you made that decision, it was a hard plant and go towards that goal.
It was, you know, as I knew at a young age, I knew that I wanted to have a job where it was something I was passionate about, that it was something that I enjoyed doing, and it's something that, you know, didn't necessarily feel like a job most of the time. Now, the way I do it now, sometimes it does feel like a job, but it's still something that I love doing, and, you know, I can never complain about. For me, it was when I started getting refining my process really just as a fantasy player. Like, I started doing rankings long before I was producing fantasy content. And when I got to TSN, I finally had an opportunity. They had a great fantasy analyst there at the time, Scott Cullen. Scott's still doing great work out there. He's not with TSN anymore, though. And Scott was kind enough to kind of allow me to, you know, come alongside him and do some fantasy content. Scott was doing all sports at the time, so I think maybe just having another, you know, set of hands for the NFL, he was more than willing to do that. And I started putting out my rankings at that point, and just to see, right, just to kind of get a feel for, is this something that I would want to continue to do, or do I want to pivot in a different direction? And I started putting up the rankings. And now when you have people interacting with those rankings and calling you out, you got to defend them, and, you know, then it was like, okay, wait a minute, like I really enjoy this process. And then I got to enter the Fantasy Pros contest just because now I was an accredited analyst, right, for a notable site. And at the time, Scott joined with me. I think we were the first Canadians, I believe, in the contest. And then once I kind of got that taste of that and realized how I kind of stacked up against some of the other analysts in the industry and some of the big names, like some of the big names of the time, right, to see my name up there with them, then it was, okay, this needs to be a full-time thing. I want to dedicate all my energy, because even back then I knew some of those other guys, they were getting to spend year-round on fantasy, and I wasn't. So I wanted to make sure that eventually I could. And it took a while. It took a really long time. I was with TSN for 4 years total, and at least 2 of those, probably 3, I was doing fantasy content. And then I got the job with the Score. And when I got the job with the Score, it wasn't as a fantasy analyst as I am now. It was NFL supervisor. So I was running our NFL team. We had 6 to 8 writers, I believe, depending on what time. I was overseeing that group and making sure we were covering all the content coming out. And I continued to do the fantasy stuff over and above. It was not required of me. I was pushing, you know, I want to do this. I'll do it on my own time. I always remember there's one story where I didn't have my rankings done. And it was, you know, coming at that time, I think we worked till 2 a.m. Just to make sure all the West Coast games were done, 2 a.m. Eastern. And about 2 a.m., I had to make a decision. Okay, either I'm going to stay here all night and work on these rankings, or I'm going to try to wake up super early in the morning and get them done. And I just decided, you know what, let's have a coffee and let's stay in the office all night. So I finished the rankings. I left at about 6 a.m. And as I got back downstairs, the parking attendant who I had seen when I came the previous afternoon, who had, you know, taken my ticket, was there that morning and was like, buddy, like, are you just leaving the office now? And I was like, yeah, you know, just bags over my eyes. I remember I was driving home and my wife woke up for work and called me and was like, "Where are you okay? Like, where are you?" And I was like, "Yeah, just had to get my rankings done. Like, don't worry, I'm almost home." So yeah, like, you know, that sort of stuff along the way that I was just, you know, willing to go over and above because I knew how much I wanted it, like you were saying. And I was fortunate enough that after working for the Score for 4 or 5 years, they offered me they saw the success I was having and offered to put me in that position full time and see what we could get out of it. And the first year that I was doing it full time was the year that I ended up winning the Fantasy Pros contest. So it all kind of came together there.
Awesome. So I mean, the journey that you've taken, working within the CFL, then heading over and being NFL specific, not necessarily fantasy, doing fantasy as an add-on, and then going full-time fantasy. So along this path, what changes have you seen within yourself from where you started to where you are now?
See, I feel like most people probably wouldn't say the bad things, but I want to tell you the bad things.
Awesome.
The one that I've seen is I've really become when it came to work, I became very robotic. Like it was because like I was saying earlier, I was trying to find every edge that I wanted to be so dialed in all the time. And it's a bad thing. You shouldn't be like that. Like I don't like I feel like I didn't really notice it until I won the contest. And then I was able to kind of take a breath and look back at, okay, what's happened here in my life, right? Like half the year I'm like off the map and I'm like so into this contest. And it was like obsession almost. And that you shouldn't be that way. You got to have that balance. You got to be able to do the work and put in the long hours, but also be able to, enjoy yourself and spend time with family and friends. So I've gotten much better at that over the last couple of years. And yeah, that is a big one that I kind of noticed along the way. It didn't really notice it in the moment, but that when I looked back, I kind of realized like, wait a minute, like I'm changing in a very bad way here. I'm becoming like way too robotic, and I'm very, a very loose personality. I love joking around with everybody. So that I'm sure other people noticed, I was not as responsive, not as jokey. I remember going on a vacation with some of my buddies, and it was during football season. We just went away for a weekend. It was actually my bachelor party. We went to Miami, and I initially, the first day we were there, all I had in my head, because it was during the football season, it was like I felt guilty going away during the football season. I couldn't have fun that first day, and then they finally shook me up and got some drinks in me, and I loosened up a little bit, and that also was bad for the Fantasy Pros contest, but that's a whole nother story.
I love that you mentioned.
Go ahead,
sorry.
Tara, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I love that you mentioned that, because I think not just within our community, but in general, that people that are passionately pursuing something, one specific thing that they're trying to succeed at, I think that might be something that people commonly face.
Well, it's like how they talk about with athletes, how they should, play multiple sports, multiple sports just to develop different skills and stuff. Just being so zoned in. I mean, I was on a show not long ago, and they were asking me about my hobbies, outside of football. And my immediate reaction was like, I don't really have that many, right? Like I've been so focused on football for a while in my career that I kind of didn't spend as much time doing some of that other stuff. And yeah, I've been much better now, especially during, quarantine and lockdowns and stuff, and getting out into nature and all of that. That's been great. But you got to make time. You got to have other interests, whether it's, even if it's just reading, watching movies, stuff like that. You got to immerse yourself in other things. You can't just be completely obsessed about one thing, because you're not going to be a well-rounded individual that way. And I learned that the hard way.
I know about immersing yourself, because I know with our podcast, we make sure we immerse ourselves, do a little background check, understand who we're viewing a little bit. We follow your stuff, but I like to dig in a little bit deeper and, get that personal touch to every show. You've got the Fantasy Football Podcast with Justin Boone. What are some of the more memorable podcasts or interviews or guests kind of interactions that you've had on that show? Is there something you just kind of shook your head as like, you know what? That was the show right there.
Oh, you're gonna get me in trouble with people, because I'm gonna pick somebody, I'm gonna forget about somebody else. The fantasy footballers, having those guys on, had them on individually, but every episode they've come on. I don't know if you guys have talked to them, but you immediately feel like you're best friends with them, right? Like they come on, and Andy Holloway, I think, still has the record for the longest episode. We normally try to keep them around 30 minutes. Andy was on with me for over an hour, and I don't even think I realized how much time, because we were just having a conversation about everything, and it was great. Derek Brown, D-Bro, great guy in the industry. You want to.
That's where I stole my look.
You want to talk about a guy who, during the season last year, I had a guest drop out on me the day before. It was less than 24 hours before a show. And in season, it's hard enough to find people when it's a month out, let alone, less than 24 hours trying to find a guest when everyone's so busy. And the first person, I had him on the show a couple times. The first person that popped into my head was, I'm going to hit up D-Bro. I bet he'll be there for me. I bet he'll have my back. I would have his. And sure enough, messaged him. He responded in like 2 minutes. Absolutely, let's do it. He was pumped up for it. And yeah, every time he's come on, I feel like him and I have a lot of similar takes too. And sometimes that's a bad thing. We were both in love with Dante Pettis, and that didn't really work out. But whether it was Robert Woods or other guys, we've had some great conversations. And oddly enough, we're doing our 200th episode this week. And I'm not only saying him because he's coming on, but he's going to be on the show this week. I think last year we had him on, it was the must-have players. And it was, I think, our most listened to show in the off season. So getting them back, getting the same guest, right? Let's same guest, same topic. I mean, there's been so many. Like you're killing me by making me pick. As much as I love ranking things, I do not want to rank all the guests that I've had.
I was going to say, how accurate do you want to get with these rankings here?
Exactly.
So we'll move on here so we don't single anyone out.
I know I'm forgetting somebody, but yeah, there's been a ton of great episodes. And what I will say is, you have some people come on where, kind of like I said about the fantasy footballers, you have that instant chemistry. You want to just sit there and talk to them forever. And other people maybe haven't had as much experience on podcasts. Maybe, it's a little harder to get that information out of them. I enjoy that too. Like that's a whole different aspect of doing the show, and it's fun. And I have to do a little more heavy lifting during those shows. But I love getting people on who maybe haven't had as much experience doing podcasts and stuff like that. But I've noticed that they're providing something in the industry that is very valuable. We got to get them in front of everyone, right? We got to get them exposed to everyone so the people are following them, because like I said earlier, we want to be following a ton of different people. The more research, the more stuff that's getting in front of your face, the better fantasy player you're going to be.
Yeah, you mentioned the footballers and D-Bro. These are guys you don't have to coax information out of. They willingly offer it, and it makes for a fantastic show. But you mentioned it, sometimes when you have to kind of work to get that, when you're about to get, you're like, oh man, I'm trying everything. I can't quite bring this out in the show. And all of a sudden you get it. And that's almost better. You know what I mean? It's like, yes, I've got that connection. We've hit that spot. We are good to go. It's kind of like hitting that home run on an 0-2 count. You're struggling. You're like, oh man, I'm going to strike out here. Please don't throw the curve. Don't throw the curve. And then somehow you get a hold of the curve, you put it over, you're like, that was perfect. It gives you that little sense of relief that you've pulled them into your show and you've got them kind of going. I love that feeling. So we got this podcast. We talked about where you're kind of going. Football seems, sports media kind of looked like it was going to be your path no matter what. It seems like you're destined to that. But say you don't go play football in high school and you don't quite get that bug where you want to get into fantasy football and stuff like that. What would you be doing?
I don't know. I've probably given different answers when I've been asked this over the years. I think my parents thought I was going to be a lawyer. When I originally went to school, when I went to university, I went for philosophy. I had great marks and I just didn't know what I wanted to do. And philosophy was something I was really interested in, but I wasn't thinking at the time, like, what am I going to do career-wise with this? I was just thinking, hey, this is super interesting. I want to go learn about this more. And so I didn't go anywhere with that, unfortunately. Right. And I had to kind of reassess. And truth be told, when I went into journalism, when I went to school for it, I really thought that was kind of like a B plan for me. Like, I'll do this and, I'll get a job doing this, but, I probably won't end up doing this career-wise. Like, I'll probably still end up doing something else. And I loved writing. And I really fought with some of my teachers about, wanting to do sports. And as much as I'm saying you got to be well-rounded, I knew back then it was sports or nothing for me. And I only wanted to cover sports, no matter what the project was. And it turned out there's a good reason for that, right? Because it led me to the career I ended up getting into. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's tough, right? Like it's tough to find your way. When you're coming out of school, I find that it's tough to make that decision of whether you're going to just go into something that you think you like, or whether something that you really have mapped out for you. Because when you're that age, when you're 17, 18, 19, you don't have a clue most of the time, right? Like, you don't know where life's going to take you, and you might not even know what you want. You're not a fully formed person at that point. And so, yeah, I kind of dove into university without really mapping out where I was going to go with it. And I don't regret it. I met a ton of great people, friends that I still have to this day, had some great experiences, and I learned a lot too. But I kind of do, looking back, I wonder what would have happened if I had taken that year off and then gone from there. So my parents, to answer your question, my parents thought I was going to be a lawyer. I really don't know. I think maybe something in the arts, like maybe I would have been a writer, but in a different way. I had all those friends that were musicians. Maybe I would have got lucky and actually become a lead singer of one of their bands. But, based on my singing earlier, you can judge how successful I would have been that one way or another with that. So yeah, I have no clue, but I really knew from a young age whether it was going to be the kind of job I have now, whether it was going to be working for a team in a different capacity or a league in a different capacity. Sports really was going to be the goal for me, no matter how it came about.
Before we move on to the next question, I want Tera to ask this because she's our resident Packer fan. This question came up here. Tera, off to you.
I saw it, yeah. So thoughts on Devonta Adams this year, Kevin?
Devonta, I still think that Rodgers is going to go back there, and I'm probably just being stupid about that at this point because I forget who said it, but whoever mentioned that, Aaron Rodgers has issues with his family and not really talking to them. Is he really going to forgive the Packers? It's a very valid point here. Right now, I am still sticking with Devonta. I have in a bunch of dynasty leagues. The guy's still one of the best receivers in the league. And I think if a trade does go down, I don't think it's going to be Jordan Love starting there this year. I think they would get somebody back, whether it was a Teddy Bridgewater, whether it was a Derek Carr, depending on what team he goes to. And if that happens, I think those guys are going to be able to keep Devonta afloat to still be a top 10 receiver. It's not like he's going to completely fall out of the mix. Still going to get a ton of targets. So I still really like Devonta this year. And if Rodgers is there, he's definitely number one on the board. But in my rankings, I've bumped him down just because of the uncertainty. I think he's around wide receiver 4 now.
Yeah, I'm with you. As the resident Packers fan, maybe I'm delusional, but I'm on the side that he's coming back. And then I did see today the update or the news that all the wide receivers sat out from camp today. So yeah, that was a little but I'm
I strike hopefully maybe.
Yeah.
So let's help Kevin out here a little bit. Keeper league, Devonta Adams in the first round, or I'm going to assume this is Jonathan Taylor in the third round.
I'm going Jonathan Taylor in a third round value there. I love that. I think Taylor deserves to be first round. I think people who are worried about, Marlon Mack coming back, the guy's coming back from injury. I think they brought him back. It's a very cheap contract. I think it's almost just like a thank you very much for your service kind of contract. I don't think he's coming in and getting significant work this year. We saw down the stretch last season. It took a little while. And I think that's why some people are still kind of a little sour on Taylor, that it took him a little while to get that job. But sometimes that's what happens with rookies, especially rookie running backs. We see these guys come on in the second half of their rookie season. And I tend to believe what I saw with him based on his profile coming out and the production he put up. I know the schedule was very easy for the Colts down the stretch. And anybody who looks at the things I've said about David Montgomery and, how he had such an easy schedule and I'm not really trusting him, there's other reasons. I'm worried about Tariq Cohen coming back for Montgomery and working back in the passing game, and Damian Williams showing up, maybe getting some work in the passing game. Maybe Justin Fields taking away some of those goal line opportunities even when he gets under center. Whereas Taylor, I think Taylor's the real deal. I think we saw him put up those monster numbers down the stretch, and I think that's the game the Colts want to play. That offensive line is still very, very strong, and they're gonna want to run that ball and protect Carson Wentz kind of in the same way that they were trying to protect Phillip Rivers last year, and that means a lot of opportunity for Taylor.
I just want to make a little shout out here. We got the man, the myth, the legend himself, Debro, checking in. Hello, Mr. Boone.
Tell him he should be prepping for the podcast later this week. Don't watch the show right now. Shut this off and go do your homework for the podcast.
Well, here's the thing. So I shaved my head. I grew my beard out so I could play Debro for the Viper Pit here. So when I'm doing this show, Derek, he's like looking at me. He's like, yeah, I know what not to do right now. So he is kind of prepping for the show by watching what not to do. I'm kind of like the stand-in right now. I'm the stand-in. I'm the D-bro stand-in.
Nice.
So kind of diving back to you, you mentioned a few relationships that you had. Your director of communications, you mentioned at TSN as well. So what are some of those, maybe one or two relationships that have really helped you along the way?
Yeah, I mean, in addition to Rom at the Ticats there, Scott McNaughton, who was also at the Ticats in the communications department, a great friend, a guy who now works for the Toronto Maple Leafs in their communications department. So, he's having a ton of success in his career. Just a great guy, somebody, a sounding board you can talk to, go back and forth with. And I learned a lot from him and how he carried himself at work, being able to, have fun, but be extremely professional at the same time. I mean, Steve Mock at TSN, Speedy was his nickname. Just another guy. He was the one that hired me at TSN, but somebody else that kind of showed me that you can have conversations. If you're someone's boss, you can have conversations. You can be strict, but you can also be a friend and an advisor. And you got to pick your moments, right? When you got to be stern, and you got to also be willing to be vulnerable and remember what it was like to be an entry-level employee and all that sort of stuff. So it took a lot from him. I mean, at the Score, so these questions, it's like I'm gonna have to rattle off like 20 people for every one. There's so many people along the way. Naviswani, our managing editor, we kind of came up together at the Score. We were supervisors. Just the nicest guy, and somebody who would do anything for his staff. Give them the shirt off his back, give them every hour in the day. Still to this day, I mean, when our copy team is swamped and it's a busy night like the NFL draft, he's in there editing my posts for me just to make sure we can get them up as quick as possible. And I always say to him, the managing editor doesn't necessarily have to be doing this. Like, we have a copy editing team. Like, what are you doing? It's 1 o'clock in the morning. But that's just the kind of guy that he is. Rory Bars, our VP of content, the guy who gave me this job, and somebody who is willing to talk to me man to man, willing to just put it on the table, whatever needs to be said, let's say it. And we're going to get better because of that. All of those people, because now I'm very much working on my own. I'm kind of on my own island with the fantasy stuff. I've been working from home now for 3 years or so. So I was kind of way before, everybody started working from home in the industry. I was kind of, laying the groundwork for that and testing it out. But before that, I was managing a team, and I was learning from all of these people, and I was taking those things that I learned along the way in order to try to be the best manager that I could be. And I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed managing the team, and we'll see, maybe down the road, we'll expand the fantasy offering at the Score, and maybe I'll be running that team and managing people again.
Matt, you're on mute again. I'm doing good in my cow role today.
Yeah, like you said, I was the one that my mic broke right before we started. Yeah.
I was trying to work the mouse, and I couldn't quite get back to the mic. And yeah, so you kind of mentioned something potentially down the road happening there. But what do you kind of got in store for this off season right now? Like you said, this is kind of your time to kind of relax a little bit. What are you doing right now? You got anything coming out down the Score that we should be watching for?
Yeah, so right now we're doing our series of breakouts and busts and sleepers and risky picks and the players. The one that I love probably more than anything writing every year is the players who are going to lead you to a title. And I'm trying to pick players kind of not everybody in the same round, so you could potentially end up with all those guys on the same team. And all that stuff's going to end up in our draft kit, and we're going to put the draft kit out. We're going to push it back, I think, a little bit this year and put it out in July. But yeah, that'll be coming out. The Score Fantasy Football podcast is, continuing going strong. Lots of great guests in the off season. Like Debro, who is watching, he'll be one of them coming up here. That. And then once we get closer to the season, I'll be putting, my projections out and having all that updated. We go to multiple shows a week at that point, once training camp starts. So yeah, it starts to ramp up. As much as right now I can maybe sneak in a week or two off. We get busier and busier as we go, and by the time it's going to be mid-July, and training camp's going to be starting, rookie camps are going to be kicking off, and the next thing you know, we'll be right underwater again.
And maybe to wrap it up, this whole interview has been just amazing advice for everybody. But for those of us that are trying to make it within the industry, give us one takeaway, one key piece of advice.
I can't narrow it down to one, I don't think. I mean, the hard work is obvious, and hoping you get those breaks that fall your way. That's very important. Trying to differentiate yourself. Like, if I was coming in now, I don't think I would do the same stuff. And it's not that I've been around for that long. I've been around for, maybe a decade, as far as like when I started putting fantasy content out at TSN. But I think that the industry, there is a lot of saturation. Obviously, there's a lot of people in the industry, and there's a lot of people putting out the same content, and that's great. And I love seeing that on my timeline. And maybe it's just because I follow so many people in the industry, but there's so many people just putting out those rankings, putting out that kind of stuff. You got to find a way to differentiate yourself. And whether that's, like I've fallen in love with Dynasty over the last few years. I like Dynasty more than redraft now. I want to keep dropping redraft leagues that I'm in order to pick up more Dynasty leagues, or convincing everyone that I'm in redraft leagues with to switch over and let's do a Dynasty startup. Maybe that's an area you can get into more. Devi, I have not touched. We've had some great people like Ray Garvin come on our show and talk about Devi, and it scares me to death because I feel like if I go down that rabbit hole, I'm never coming out. I'm just going to, lock myself in my office every day. So I trying to find, and there's so many different things, whether you want to, if you're looking to win your fantasy league, I think you should be following people who, over time you're seeing results from. Over time, they're helping you win. And that might sound obvious, but there are a lot of people in the industry. There's different types of content. There's also entertainment stuff in the industry that is hilarious, and you want to watch it, you want to consume it, but you got to remember that, some of that hot take stuff, if there's not the numbers and the stats and the logic of, why they're making those decisions, maybe that's not the best, person to follow as far as making decisions on your lineups, but you can still enjoy that content for what it is, right? So I love a lot of that stuff, a lot of the quick video stuff that we're seeing come out. I think that stuff's fantastic. So there's different ways trying things that are new, and it's not always going to work. Not everything is going to be a home run, but giving that stuff a shot and seeing what sticks. And just trying to carve your own lane, because if you come in now and you're just trying to do, rankings and waiver wire and all that stuff, which I'm still doing, maybe foolishly, it's going to be very hard to get noticed and to get yourself in the industry. So trying to find that unique approach and trying to find a unique voice in a very growing big industry is probably your best bet.
As Debro, I think it was Debro who said it best. Be niche. Be niche. That's kind of where we kind of go with on that one.
Absolutely.
30 seconds here. Thoughts on OJ Howard this year?
I mean, I think it would take a Gronk injury for something to happen. I know everybody wants to look back and say, well, at the beginning of the season last year, OJ Howard was out producing Gronk before he got hurt. I think that was a lot of Gronk having to knock the rust off, Gronk having to get back in shape. And we saw as the year went along last year, Gronk was that much, stronger as time passed. So I think those guys, there'll be a little more of a split there. I still think Gronk is going to be Brady's guy. He's going to be Brady's guy in the red zone. I mean, let's not forget that it was like 2 years ago when we were all on that OJ Howard bandwagon and he let us down, right? And there was no Gronk there to stop him at that point. So you can't get overly excited. I mean, as a dynasty asset, you want to throw him on your bench. Sure. And maybe, next year we see Gronk or Brady and Gronk move out of the way, and then Howard becomes a starting tight end, but not a player in redraft that I'd be looking at, and not a guy that I think is going to do that much in 2021. It's going to take another year or so before we see him produce.
Okay, and then just like that, we're wrapping up this show here. Just kind of let everyone know where to find you. We know the score. Throw out that Twitter handle, that Instagram, that TikTok, whatever that might be.
Find me on Twitter at Justin Boone. Nice and easy. Don't forget the E on Boone, and don't add an E to Justin, which has happened a couple times, including in my Eliminator League when we first had the thread. And whoever Justine Boone is unfortunately in that thread now. Hopefully she's left at this point, but a little confusing for her, I'm sure. All the content's at the score. And one of the big things, there are a lot of great sites and draft kits that you pay for out there. The score, you don't have to. Just download the app. It's free. All my content, my rankings, everything is on there for free. So come consume it. Come ask me questions. We'll be doing lots of live video stuff like this. I love doing like the live video Q&As where I'm trying to get to as many questions, and it's kind of just a mad dash to get through the gauntlet and try to help as many people as we can. So check those out. But I tweet a lot of that stuff out. So you can follow me on Twitter and get that. Definitely download the Score app, not just for my content, but for all of the Scores content. I mean, I know it's in the name, but our box scores are the best in the business. I mean, as efficient as you want them to be. They have every bit of information you could possibly want, including lots of betting stuff in there as well. And if the Score Bet is available in your state right now, go check that out. That's growing. Love that product. And then the podcast, the Score Fantasy Football Podcast, which is kind of my baby at this point. And I get excited. That's one thing that a couple years ago, when we first did it the first year, I don't think I had enough fun with it. It kind of felt like it was like this new thing that I had to do, and I was just kind of trying to figure it out. And then going into year 2 with it, I really started enjoying it. And now it's like I can't wait to get behind the mic and have a great guest on and learn from them. And then when the season comes around and, you know, we're doing it multiple times, 2-3 times a week, just getting able to kind of drop that knowledge and kind of get it all off my chest, right? Because maybe you don't get to write about a certain player during the week, and then on those shows you can get it all out, answer questions and all that sort of stuff. So come check that out as well on whatever podcast platform you're using.
There you go. You heard it. Make sure you check out at Justin Boone. No E on Justin, with an E on the Boone. And we got Tera Roberts. It's Tera time. Make sure you check her out here. And obviously, Matt Donnelly, you can see it on the screen. I don't need to have to repeat that. So I leave you with this. What is rational is actual, and what is actual is rational. There's some philosophical words for you for the day. And if that doesn't work, if you ain't first, you're last. Shake and bake. We're gone.